Nobody saw this coming. What started as yet another frustrating night for the Indiana Fever may have turned into the moment that changes everything between Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White. And if you have been following this team closely, you already know exactly why fans are fired up right now, because for months, people have been asking the same question over and over again. Why does it feel like the Fever's most powerful weapon is constantly being held back? If you are a true Caitlin Clark fan and believe the Indiana Fever should be building around her strengths, drop your thoughts in the comments right now.
Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark on the bench yelling at each other. Talking about some defensive nonsense. My hands are straight up. I'm going straight up. Hey, you, sit down, take your seat. Caitlin, get your ass up. Caitlin shaking her head. Nope. This coach is an idiot. Nope. This coach is a dumbass. Nope. This coach is foolish. Nope. She's got no idea what she's talking about.
What have you done to be talking to Caitlin Clark? You ain't done nothing, Stephanie White. You a trash-ass coach.
Do you guys feel like any of the officiating rule changes are impacting how you're able to play as a team defensively?
Officiating wasn't my problem tonight.
The officiating wasn't my problem tonight. You see what her problem was. It's that damn trash-ass head coach, Stephanie.
The tension that fans had been sensing all season finally boiled over on the sideline. Cameras caught a heated exchange between Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White during one of the most frustrating stretches of the Fever's season. Clark visibly upset, White looking furious, and the players nearby clearly uncomfortable. And what followed only made things worse. The Fever struggled offensively once again, the momentum completely evaporated, the rotations baffled fans, and the player single-handedly responsible for transforming the popularity of the entire league found herself sitting on the bench for long stretches at a time. That is when social media completely erupted. Fans were not talking about the loss, they were not talking about the officiating, and they were not even focused on the opponent. They were talking about one thing only: the increasingly obvious disconnect between Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White. Former players, analysts, and commentators have all repeatedly questioned whether Indiana is truly making the most of what Clark brings to the table. This is a player who shattered NCAA scoring records, instantly became the biggest draw in women's basketball, and whose ability to stretch defenses from beyond 30 feet reshapes the entire geometry of the court. And yet there are still games where she looks restricted rather than unleashed, and fans are absolutely taking notice.
Stephanie White, Caitlin Clark, bumping heads on the sideline. Stephanie White showing up her star player on the bench, saying, "Get the F out of your seat. Raven Johnson, take her spot." I don't care how many hugs they have. I don't care how many times Stephanie White pulls Caitlin Clark close by her hip. I don't care how many glowingly things Stephanie White says about Caitlin Clark in these radio interviews. You can't sit here and convince me Stephanie White actually respects Caitlin Clark. She sees Caitlin Clark and she hates everything about her. Why? Because Caitlin Clark is everything Stephanie White failed to become. Stephanie White was brought in to diminish, tear down, and ruin the Golden Goose. She's doing a hell of a job.
What made this situation even more explosive was what happened after the game. When reporters asked Clark about officiating and defensive struggles, her response immediately caught everyone off guard. She made it clear that the referees were not her concern that night. And that alone said everything. This is a player who has never held back when it comes to calling out officials, so the fact that she was not even focused on them told fans that something else was bothering her far more deeply. Most believe that something was sitting right beside the court, Stephanie White. And this frustration did not appear out of nowhere. All season long, criticism had been building every time Clark was pulled off the floor during hot stretches, moved off the ball, or placed into offensive systems that seemed to work against her strengths. Every questionable substitution, every stalled possession, every collapse that followed her exit from the game, it all kept piling up. Then came the sideline confrontation, and suddenly every concern fans had been raising became impossible to dismiss. The images spread everywhere, and people began seriously questioning whether this relationship had reached its breaking point. Because when a superstar shows visible frustration, organizations take notice. When the face of a franchise looks unhappy, the pressure starts mounting fast. And when the player responsible for bringing millions of new fans into the league appears disconnected from her own coach, that is when things get very real. But what reportedly happened behind the scenes after that confrontation may be even more unsettling, because insiders and commentators are now pointing to a much deeper problem that goes far beyond one heated moment on the bench. And that is exactly where this story gets even more interesting.
You see on the sidelines about defense, but Raven Johnson, who was supposed to be a defensive specialist, fouled out playing only 10 minutes and not a peep from Stephanie White. Stephanie White doesn't hold all the other players accountable. That's not what happens. Never hear her holding Aaliyah Boston accountable, never hear her holding Dantis accountable, never hear her holding Kelsey Mitchell accountable, never hear her holding anybody accountable that's not named Caitlin.
And this is where things shift from simple frustration to full-blown controversy. Because after that sideline confrontation, fans were no longer just questioning one substitution, they started questioning the entire direction of the Indiana Fever. And honestly, it is not hard to understand why. Look at what consistently happens whenever Caitlin Clark finds her rhythm. She starts creating opportunities, pushing the pace, locating open shooters, and making defenses scramble, and then suddenly she is on the bench. The offense immediately slows down, the energy drains out, and opponents go on runs. It has happened far too many times to be a coincidence, and that is exactly why the backlash against Stephanie White has reached a level nobody anticipated. Fans are not simply upset about losing games, they are furious because they believe the Fever are actively wasting the most valuable asset in women's basketball. Caitlin Clark is not just another star player. She is the player who transformed television ratings, the player selling out arenas coast to coast, the player opposing teams circle on their calendars months in advance. And yet, many Fever fans feel like Indiana still has not figured out the most basic thing: build everything around her. Instead, the offense looks inconsistent and confused. One possession Clark is running everything, the next she is standing off the ball, and the next someone else is directing the offense entirely. There is no clear identity, and when a team lacks identity, frustration spreads fast, not just in the stands, but inside the organization itself. That is why people keep replaying that sideline exchange, because many believe it revealed something far bigger than a disagreement over one play. It exposed a deep, growing tension, the kind that builds when expectations are not being met, when a superstar feels she has more to give but keeps getting held back, and the kind that eventually forces organizations into making very difficult decisions.
White yelling at Caitlin about defense like she's a problem. CeCe said, babes, I'm going straight up. What else do you want me to do? Steph White said, fuck out my face. I'm putting Raven Johnson in. 22 gets up. Raven sits down. Raven fouls out in 10 minutes of playtime. Raven Johnson can't play now? Or you can't coach properly?
What is making this whole situation even more intense is the growing conversation around Caitlin Clark's long-term future with the team. To be clear, there is no indication she is pushing for a trade and no evidence she is planning to go anywhere. But fans have started asking the uncomfortable questions out loud. What happens if Indiana keeps underperforming? What happens if the offensive system never fully unlocks what she is capable of? And what happens if the relationship between her and her coach continues to break down? Those questions are getting louder by the week. And that is exactly why this moment feels so significant, because this was not just another loss and not just another emotional exchange during a game. It felt like a warning sign, a clear signal that something is not working. The difficult reality for Indiana is that they cannot afford to look the other way. When an average player shows frustration, it barely registers. But when Caitlin Clark shows frustration, every camera in the building catches it, every analyst picks it apart, and every fan across the country has something to say about it. And that is precisely why the pressure on Stephanie White has never been greater than it is right now.
Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark seen yelling back and forth at each other on the bench. Stephanie White doesn't seem to realize it's not Caitlin Clark's defense as much as it is her terrible schemes defensively. She sees Caitlin Clark and she sees herself, but not as a success story. She sees herself as a failure. Like, damn, that could have been.
The Fever entered this season with championship expectations and were supposed to be taking a serious step forward. Instead, the biggest storyline surrounding the team has become internal tension, questionable rotations, and growing concerns about whether their superstar is being used the right way. That is a nightmare situation for any organization because wins have a way of quieting everything down. But when wins stop coming consistently, every disagreement gets amplified, every argument grows louder, and every frustrated reaction turns into a headline. So the real question now is straightforward: will Stephanie White make the adjustments that fans have been demanding, or has the damage already gone too far? Because after this latest confrontation, one thing is crystal clear: Caitlin Clark's patience is wearing thin. And if Indiana does not find answers soon, this story has every chance of becoming the biggest controversy of the entire WNBA season. Do you think Stephanie White's coaching decisions are the Indiana Fever's biggest problem right now? Let us know in the comments.